You've heard of Caesar. You've heard of Alexander the Great. But have you heard about the ancient king whose impact was right up there with them, yet most of us barely know his name? Today, we're talking about Khosrow I, the great king of kings of the Sasanian Empire. I mean, listen to the titles history gave this guy. He was known as Khosrow Anushirvan, which means the Immortal Soul. He was also called Dadgar, the dispenser of justice. Pretty impressive, right? But the real story of how he got those titles? Well, it's written in both ink and blood. And it reveals a leader who was way more complex and, frankly, more fascinating than those grand names suggest. And this, right here, is the core puzzle of his reign. How does a man known as the Just end up executing his own family? How can a philosopher king build his throne on the back of brutal pragmatism? In this explainer, we're going to unpack how Khosrow used both incredible wisdom and absolute ruthlessness to save a dying empire and turn it into a global superpower. Okay, so to really get this guy, you have to understand the absolute train wreck he inherited. When Khosrow came to power in 531 CE, the Sasanian Empire wasn't just in trouble. It was teetering on the edge of total collapse. I mean, just picture the scene. Internally, he's got brothers who think they should be king. The government is basically broke because a handful of powerful noble families are hoarding all the land and not paying any taxes. On the borders, he's got two superpowers to deal with, the mighty Byzantine Empire to his west and the aggressive Hephthalites to the east. But believe it or not, the most immediate danger, the biggest fire he had to put out, was burning inside his own kingdom. And that fire was a radical religious movement called Mazdakism. You can think of it as a sort of ancient proto-communism. They were calling for the total sharing of property and, at least according to their enemies, even the sharing of women. This idea was absolutely tearing the empire apart at the seams. It was empowering the poor and threatening to completely destroy the social order that the whole Sasanian state was built on. Khosrow looked at this whole mess and knew he couldn't fix a single thing until he had total, unquestioned control. And the first steps he took to grab that power, they were swift, they were smart, and they were incredibly violent. First things first, he couldn't deal with the chaos at home while fighting a war. So he signs the perpetual peace with the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. In return, Justinian pays him a staggering 11,000 pounds of gold. Now that money was great, but it bought Khosrow something even more valuable: breathing room. With his western border secure, he turned his full attention inward. And the way he dealt with the Mazdakites, wow, it's straight out of a horror story. According to the Persian epic, the Shahnameh, Khosrow invited the captured leader, Mazdak, to his orchard to see some strange new trees. When Mazdak got there, he saw his own followers planted in the ground, buried alive with just their feet sticking out of the earth. Then Mazdak himself was executed. The message was crystal clear and utterly terrifying. Just like that, the internal revolution was over. But he wasn't done, and this is where you see that cold, brutal logic at work. After crushing the uprising, he moved to eliminate every single other potential threat. His uncle, who was part of a plot against him, executed. His eldest brother, who had some sympathy for the Mazdakites, killed. In fact, all of his brothers and their sons were systematically put to death. It was a complete and total purge, no loose ends. His throne was now secure. Now, you might be thinking, this guy is just a brutal tyrant. But this is where the story gets really interesting, because once his power was absolute, he began the real work of his life. He launched a massive top-to-bottom overhaul of the entire state, not with armies, but with brilliant foundational reforms. Job number 1, fix the money. Before him, taxes were a mess. They were based on a percentage of the harvest, so the government's income was totally unpredictable. So Khosrow completely changed the game. He brought in a fixed poll tax and a stable land tax. All of a sudden, the state had a predictable, steady stream of cash flowing directly to the treasury. It's like he invented the ancient world's first IRS, cutting out the corrupt nobles and building a reliable financial foundation for his empire. Okay, so with the money sorted, who's going to help him run the place? He knew he couldn't trust the old, powerful families, so he created a whole new social class, the Dekhans. Think of them as a new lower nobility, a class of small landowners who owed their power and position directly to him, the king. They became the loyal middle management of his empire, the backbone of his new government and his new army. And finally, he fixed the military. The old way of doing things with one single supreme commander Well, that was just asking for a military coup. So Khosrow split the job. He divided the empire into 4 military commands, each with its own general. It's a concept that's strikingly similar to modern regional commands, like CENTCOM or INDOPACOM. It was genius. No single general could get powerful enough to threaten him, and the empire could now effectively fight wars on multiple fronts at the same time. So let's recap. He's got a full treasury, a loyal government, and a brand new, efficient, professional army. The machine was built. Now it was time to turn it on. And the results on the world stage were immediate, and they were dramatic. So remember that perpetual peace he signed with the Byzantines? Well, turns out perpetual had an expiration date. By 540, just 8 years later, Khosrow saw his chance. His empire was stable, and Emperor Justinian was busy fighting in Italy. He tore up the treaty and marched his new army west, straight into the wealthy heart of Byzantine Syria. And that new army was an absolute juggernaut. In 540, he sacks Antioch, one of the greatest cities in the entire Roman world. Then he turns east, makes an alliance with the nomadic Go-Turks, and together they completely shatter the Hephthalite Empire. Then he sends his forces south, conquering Yemen and projecting Sasanian power deep into the Arabian Peninsula. Just think about that. He was fighting and winning on 3 different fronts at once. The reforms were working. But here's the thing. He wasn't just a warlord. He was a master of statecraft. After decades of war, he sat down and negotiated another treaty with the Byzantines in 562. And check out this one clause. It's basically an ancient arms control agreement, designed to stop either side from building up fortifications on the border. This shows you he wasn't just some barbarian at the gates. He was negotiating with the most powerful empire in the world as an equal. So at the end of the day, after a half-century of bloodshed, reform, and conquest, what was the final verdict? Well, Khosrow left behind an impact so profound, he'd be remembered for 1,000 years. Here is probably the ultimate sign of his success. You know how the name Caesar stopped being just a name and became the title for Roman emperors? The exact same thing happened with Khosrow. His name, Kisra, in Arabic, just became the generic word for all the Persian kings who came after him. He didn't just rule, he became the very definition of what it meant to be king. And that was his legacy. When he died, the Sasanian Empire was at its absolute peak. It was stable, it was wealthy, and it was a powerhouse that stretched from the deserts of Yemen to the mountains of Afghanistan. He was handed a collapsing house of cards, and he left behind a fortress of granite. Which brings us right back to where we started. Khosrow created stability, he provided justice for his people, and he kickstarted a golden age of science and art. But he built that golden age on a foundation of brutal purges and endless war. His story forces us to ask a really tough question. Is it possible for a ruler to be a philosopher and a tyrant, a dispenser of justice and a man of blood? At the end of the day, can a ruler truly be both just and ruthless?